They say comedy comes from pain, but in Richard Pryor's case, the pain ran so deep that it's a wonder he ever found the strength to laugh at all, let alone teach the world to laugh with him. This is the story of a man who transformed unspeakable trauma into transcendent art, who broke every barrier Hollywood had to offer, and who ultimately set himself on fire, literally, before finding redemption in his final years. Imagine entering the world in 1940, not in a hospital or a loving home, but in a brothel run by your grandmother. That was Richard Pryor's beginning. His mother worked as a sex worker in that very house. His father was an ex-boxer turned pimp and hustler. This wasn't just poverty, this was a childhood steeped in violence, exploitation, and horror. Young Richard witnessed things no child should see. He watched bar fights through windows. He spied on his mother while she worked. He once discovered a dead baby in a shoebox, an image that surely haunted him forever. Perhaps most terrifyingly, he saw his mother attack his father with a knife during one of their violent confrontations. But the worst was yet to come. At just 7 years old, a teenager sexually abused him. Then, when he was 14, a Catholic priest violated him again. Richard Pryor's childhood was a catalog of trauma, each entry more devastating than the last. Yet somewhere in this darkness, a spark of light appeared. One day, young Richard was playing around a railing of bricks when he started falling off on purpose. The women in the house began to laugh. But when he slipped and fell into dog poop, something magical happened. His usually stern grandmother burst into laughter. In that moment, Richard Pryor discovered his superpower. He could make people laugh. He could transform pain into joy, even if just for a moment. A perceptive teacher noticed Richard's talent and made him a deal. Show up to school on time, and he could perform for the class for 10 minutes every week. For a kid who struggled with everything else, this was pure motivation. Richard threw himself into slapstick routines, making his classmates roar with laughter. A local director cast him in a community theater production of Rumpelstiltskin and encouraged him to believe in his abilities. But just as things seemed to stabilize, abandonment struck. Richard's mother left when he was somewhere between 5 and 10 years old. Sources vary, though some say she fled from his father's brutal beatings. His grandmother stepped up to raise him, but the damage was done. By age 16, Richard was a father himself, his girlfriend pregnant with his child. The twisted part? She wasn't just seeing Richard, she was also involved with his own father. The cycle of dysfunction continued. School couldn't contain Richard's chaos. At 14, administrators expelled him. He bounced between odd jobs, janitor, laborer, until he joined the army at 18, hoping for structure and stability. Instead, he found more violence. Stationed in West Germany in 1958, Richard and several other black soldiers were provoked by a white officer who made offensive racial comments. They beat him badly, using a knife in the assault. Though the officer survived, Richard spent the next 2 years behind bars. After his military stint, Richard returned home and tried to settle down, marrying Patricia Price from his Illinois hometown. They had a son, Richard Jr., but the marriage collapsed before the baby could even form memories. It would be the first of Richard's 7 marriages to 5 different women. Yes, he married 2 of them twice. But something else was taking root during this period: Richard's comedy career. He began performing in Midwestern clubs, finding his rhythm with audiences. Then he made the leap that every ambitious comedian must make. He moved to New York City. In New York, he opened for the legendary Nina Simone, who later recalled that Richard shook like he had malaria before going on stage. She had to hold him and rock him like a child to calm his nerves. Richard was terrified because he knew a secret about himself. He was a fraud. He was just doing a Bill Cosby impression. The breaking point came in Las Vegas. Standing before a packed house, Richard suddenly realized he couldn't keep pretending. He he walked off stage mid-performance and disappeared. Richard fled to San Francisco, immersing himself in the counterculture scene. He studied poets and revolutionaries, absorbing the raw honesty of the counterculture movement. When he returned to stand-up, he was no longer imitating anyone. He had found his voice, edgy, honest, unfiltered, and painfully funny. He channeled every ounce of his trauma into his comedy, and audiences ate it up. As Richard's career soared, his personal life spiraled. In 1967 alone, he had a daughter with an ex-girlfriend and married struggling actress Shelley Bonis. They had a daughter together before divorcing shortly after.
Richard dated famous women like Margot Kidder and Pam Grier, but his relationships always ended the same way: infidelity and addiction. Pam Grier tried to help him. She taught him to read. Richard had been illiterate, learning his lines by sounding them out. She helped him recognize his worth despite his depression and self-doubt. But in 1977, while they were still together, Richard had an affair with another woman, got her pregnant, and married her. He didn't break up with Pam, he just moved on and dumped her later. Richard's pattern with women reflected the violence he'd witnessed as a child. He often beat his wives and girlfriends, ensuring that few relationships lasted. His love life was as chaotic as his childhood had been. Yet Richard was breaking barriers in Hollywood. He appeared in films like Lady Sings the Blues with Diana Ross, then landed major roles in Superman 3, where he earned more than Christopher Reeve, and Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder. On that film's set, Richard became paranoid and demanding, insisting on helicopter transport and firing crew members he imagined had insulted him. What his colleagues didn't fully realize was that Richard's behavior stemmed from his worsening addiction. After being introduced to drugs by Red Fox, owner of a small LA comedy club, Richard's dependence had become all-consuming. Warner Brothers refused to cast him in Blazing Saddles, despite him co-writing it, because they couldn't trust he'd make it through filming. By 1980, Richard's addiction had reached catastrophic levels. He was using heavily and drinking vodka every day. That year, his grandmother died, leaving him unmoored. One June evening, while using, Richard poured rum over himself and struck a match. He went up in flames instantly. Horrified by what he'd done, Richard jumped through a window and ran down the street, his body ablaze. Police finally caught him and rushed him to the hospital with second- and third-degree burns covering more than half his body. The public thought it was an accident, a tragic result of being under the influence. But years later, his wife revealed the truth. Richard had been trying to end his life. Somehow, Richard survived. He married Jennifer Lee, the woman he'd been with the night before his third wedding in 1981, but he relapsed, and Lee left after just 1 year. In 1983, Richard finally kicked his substance addiction. His career revived, and he married aspiring actress Flynn Belaine in 1986. They divorced a year later, then got back together. During this period, Richard welcomed 2 babies with 2 different women in the same year, one with his girlfriend Geraldine Mason, one with Belaine. He and Belaine married again in 1990, then divorced again in 1991. But Richard's body was sending him warnings he couldn't ignore. He'd had a heart attack in 1977, another in 1990, and underwent triple bypass surgery in 1991. Then came the diagnosis that would change everything: multiple sclerosis. In the late 1980s, people noticed Richard losing weight and whispered about AIDS. The truth was MS, a disease that would slowly rob him of mobility and eventually his ability to speak, the cruelest fate for a comedian whose gift was his voice. Richard called Jennifer Lee for help. She moved back to LA, downsized his life, and married him again in 2001. They stayed together until the end. Richard tried to perform in the 90s, but his decline was obvious. His last film appearance came in 1997's Lost Highway, where he used a motorized scooter. Eventually, the quick-witted genius could barely speak at all. Richard Pryor died in December 2005, 9 days after his 65th birthday, from his third heart attack. According to Lee, he died with a smile on his face. She scattered his ashes in Hawaii as he'd wished. Richard Pryor didn't just tell jokes, he revolutionized comedy. He co-hosted the Academy Awards alongside other major stars, becoming one of the first African-American co-hosts in 1977. He was the first Black person to host Saturday Night Live. He was the first Black actor to sign a $40 million deal with Columbia Pictures. He and Gene Wilder formed Hollywood's first interracial comedy duo. He received the inaugural Mark Twain Award for American humor. A bronze statue of Richard now stands in his hometown, a permanent reminder of the boy who fell in dog poop and discovered that laughter could transform anything, even unspeakable pain. Comedians from Dave Chappelle to countless others cite Richard as their inspiration. Jerry Seinfeld called him the Picasso of our profession. Chris Rock called him comedy's Rosa Parks. Publications consistently rank him as the greatest stand-up comedian of all time. But perhaps Richard's greatest legacy is simpler. He stood up for the marginalized. He advocated for gay rights when it wasn't popular. He fought against animal cruelty even after his MS diagnosis, refusing to support animal testing despite it potentially leading to a cure for his condition. He saved baby elephants in Botswana and wrote to circus ringmasters urging them to stop using animals. Richard Pryor spent his life on fire, first with trauma, then with addiction, then literally in flames, and finally with the burning desire to make people laugh through their pain. He never fully escaped his demons, but he taught us that maybe escape isn't the point. Maybe the point is to take all that darkness and set it ablaze with light, even if it burns you in the process. That was Richard Pryor's gift to the world, proof that even from the ashes, something beautiful can rise.